I'm Joe Stamps. I am the vocalist for Baal. 35 years old, 6 foot, Leo. Yeah, I've got quite a pragmatic approach really when it comes to vocal arrangement in particular. I'm always involved from the very beginning because I like to be there when a song is forming and I can really start to understand what it might be about from that. I can also be involved in the actual structuring of the song as well and everything. I quite like to be involved from the ground level, but at the same time my actual contribution, like true contribution, doesn't come until the song itself is actually set in stone, and that's when I can start to sort out the actual vocal arrangement. I can identify where I'm going to do vocals, what sort of vocals they're going to be, whether it's from like the high pitched kind of black metal kind of shrieking vocal to the lower death metal vocal, anything in between, kind of spoken word, that sort of thing. It is quite an academic kind of thought process. I tend to kind of think about how many lines I can fit into certain sections, how many syllables I can fit into each line, and then when I actually come to write the lyrics, it has to be less than that amount of syllables that I've actually thought of that kind of fits with the beat and with the riff. I have done poetry, yeah, so I've got an understanding of things like iambic pentameter and things like that, haikus even. Yeah. That's basically how I start off by writing a song. But it is kind of in those early processes that I actually start to feel what the song's going to be about, and it's only now that I'm kind of in my mid-30s that I actually feel that I'm kind of capable of approaching the kind of topics that we do approach with Baal. I mean, I think sometimes it's very much kind of a writer's thing. Actually, funnily enough, you find this a lot with stand-up comedians, that you have to have had somewhat of a life. You have to have had a lot of life experience to really sort of not only have had the experiences to able to draw from, but also to kind of have the maturity to actually be able to articulate your feelings around them. And I think that very much rings true for the kind of things that we do now in Baal. I mean, a lot of my previous bands, I've written about mythology, I've written about monsters and video games and things like, just things that I thought were cool. But I've always sort of had this desire to kind of vent and have some sort of a purge, some sort of a catharsis of more important topics. Something I'm very much drawn from, and something that I realised quite early on in life, was I used to have nightmares, and then if I wrote about the nightmare that I'd had, it stopped being something that scared me and it became something that I'd created and that I had control over. Yeah. And so I find that with things that have happened in my life or negative experiences, if I write about them, I actually have some sort of control over them, some sort of better understanding. Yeah. It helps me to come to terms with them in many ways. I have to say that I've never done the traditional frontman thing very well. It's never come naturally to me, and especially when I first started in bands. When I first got into heavy metal, I used to see these guys with tattoos bouncing around a stage, like bellowing at people. And I was a quiet theatre kid, and there was never anything about that made me think that I could do that. And so when I did start doing it, and I kind of fell into it by accident, I kind of had this persona that was more of like an awkward best man speech at a wedding on stage, which through almost like an idiot savant, it actually worked well for us. It kind of endeared people to us, where a lot of local bands were kind of going around like talking to a pub full of 10 people, like James Hetfield would talk to a sold out stadium.
Yeah.
I was there and was like, all right,
being very self-aware about it,
yeah. But I think that's that does actually feed a bit into how I am with Baal, because there's this perception that heavy metal frontmen are going to be sort of powerful and strong and confident. And if you kind of challenge that, and if you have a persona where you're showing weakness in your body language, in sort of how you move, which is something that I've got a lot of experience of doing theatre, playing different characters and whatnot. Because even when you play characters in theatre, you're still drawing from aspects of yourself.
Yeah.
It's not just pretending. It's you playing any form of character. You find aspects of a character that you share, like personality traits with, and you kind of instill that into your performance. And it's very much what I do now, and it's very liberating as well, because I think sort of in day-to-day life, it's not even a masculinity thing, because I think it affects everyone regardless of whether you know what gender you are or who you are. I think that there is this sort of feeling that you need to portray yourself as your strongest self, and so if you're able to portray your weaker self on stage as part of a controlled performance, it's like this weight is lifted from you. And it's strange. I've always felt like the stage is like a very safe place for me to sort of articulate myself in the way that I want to, but sort of real life social situations not so much.
Yeah.
I think that we've very much experienced that with a lot of live shows that we've had, where, I mean, recent tours and things, we've actually had people crying in the audience and stuff, and you know, it seems strange to say that's nice to see, but it in many ways, when you've got a type of music like this and a type of vocal style that I do, that is very much you kind of screaming what you mean to people, it's quite easy for things to kind of get lost in the flux, like to actually translate your meaning, and the knowledge that we can do this kind of abrasive music and actually translate the meaning of the themes of the songs to a crowd that didn't know us from Adam before, like we walked out onto the stage, is quite, it's nice to see. And I think that it not only comes from music, but it does come from the on-stage performance as well. It comes across as real because it is real. Perhaps not so much actual live performance, but lyrically there's certain vocalists and lyricists, I should say, that I do take a lot of influence from. I think J.R. Hayes from Pig Destroyer writes some of the most poetic lyrics. I actually wrote a university essay on some of his lyrics. The track Verminous in particular, the dead honeybees suckle withered flowers because they don't know what else to do. I like his use of metaphor. I particularly like Caro Tang from Oathbreaker. I think I'm saying her surname correctly, but I think that her lyrics just elicit something immensely tragic, but in a beautiful way, which is something that I try to do in my lyrics a lot. I don't like to just sort of say appropriately sad words to try and convey sadness. I think, especially when you're dealing with things like loss, you have to kind of reflect the beauty of the thing that was there that has now been lost, in order to fully get across why that grief, why that sense of loss is there. I think in my own lyrics, I do touch upon a lot of things that have happened in my life, but try to keep them relatively ambiguous. For two reasons, actually, and this is something that's kind of worked out in a more favourable way. First of all, I want to keep a sense of privacy. Like, I don't want everyone knowing my business. But secondly, I find that it forces the listener to kind of relate it to themselves rather than purely to my experiences and purely it being about me.
Yeah.
They're forced to relate it to themselves, and I think it makes it a lot more powerful because of that. I think in particular with Ball, there's been certain themes we have touched on a fair bit. Probably one of the more difficult things to actually write songs about appropriately, I think, is something like what we touch on An Orchestra of Flies, which is suicidal ideation, because it's a difficult topic to talk about, and it's a difficult topic to, especially to create anything artistic about in a way that is tasteful and in a way that is appropriate. And I think that there's a lot of ways that you can come at it from, and I think that there's a lot of facets to it, and it is something that kind of comes up in a lot of our lyrics and a lot of our songs. Unfortunately, because of my own experience with it. I think in particular with suicidal ideation, I mean, An Orchestra of Flies very much paints the picture of someone who can't hear what others are saying to them because of this deafening orchestra of flies. The flies themselves kind of, you relate to death like a rotting carcass or something like that. So it's a very visceral image. But whereas a lot of songs about suicide will kind of touch upon something like the person who's gone. The fear that you could have that feeling yourself, but if you've known anyone who has taken their own life, you realise that in this very moment you're not so willing to go, whereas you may have known someone who kind of embraced it almost like a traveller returning home or something. It's a really it's a terrifying prospect for you, and I think that that's really what I try to get across with a song like An Orchestra of Flies. And I think that it's something that a lot of people can relate to, that it's not the cliff edge so much, it's the desire to jump that is what scares you. It's a common misunderstanding that it's about the person who's died, because a lot of the time it's actually about the people who are still left, and if you're one of the people who are still left, you can relate to something like that, you can relate to those lyrics. There's certainly moments of light from the things that I've been writing. The Ocean That Fills a Wound is very much about overcoming alcoholism. And so while it's quite sad and it sort of documents quite an uncomfortable addiction almost, I suppose, it does end with you coming through it. But the knowledge that it's always going to be there. But I think for the most part, even though the songs themselves are actually quite sad, there is a lot of positivity about writing songs that's sad. It's very much like, I mean, if you go to the movies or whatever, like you sometimes want to watch a sad film, and I think that there's a lot of people who feel a lot of sadness in their lives, feel a lot of grief, a lot of depression, anxiety, solitude. And I think actually listening to music like this and lyrics like this can make them feel less alone.